In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on March 2nd, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Duke versus North Carolina State. The market clearly treats Duke as the stronger side coming into Raleigh, a true road favorite with the expectation that they are the ones dictating how this game feels for most of the night. Duke rolls in at 27-2, sitting at number 1 in the AP poll, with the kind of statistical profile that makes analytics folks on Ken Pom or Torvik nod quietly to themselves. The offense grades out in that national top tier, the defense grades out even higher, and the average margin hovers around 20 points per game, which is not normal. It is the kind of thing you usually only see from teams that people talk about years later. North Carolina State, on the other side, is sitting at 19-10 under first-year head coach Will Wade, playing in the Lenovo Center with that every possession matters for March pressure humming in the background. The contrast in styles gives this matchup a very specific flavor. Duke plays with a kind of ruthless balance, valuing good shots, limiting wasted trips, and then backing it all with a defense that has zero interest in making your sets look pretty. NC State really leans into offense, hanging around the mid-80s in scoring while allowing opponents into the mid-70s, and their defense tends to slide toward the middle of the national pack or worse when the opponent has real firepower. That is why their games often feel like streaks layered on top of streaks, fun for neutrals, less fun for anyone who likes clean half-court defense. Recent results tell the same story in a louder voice. Duke has been handing out scorelines like 100-56 against Notre Dame, 101-64 against Syracuse, and 70-54 at Pitt, which reads less like a schedule and more like a collection of warning labels for the rest of the conference. Those games are not just blowouts, they are demonstrations of how high the floor is when both ends click together, and that kind of reliability usually travels pretty well in conference play. Injuries and depth make the front court comparison even more lopsided than it looks at first glance. Duke is missing reserve center Ifeanyi Ufechukwu, who is still on the roster but out for the year with a knee injury, so there is no surprise depth piece walking through the tunnel. North Carolina State, meanwhile, lists forwards Jerry Deng and Colt Langdon on the active roster, but both are out, with Deng redshirting and Langdon ruled out from seeing the floor this season, which quietly squeezes the Wolfpack front line when the game turns into a long, physical grind. Put simply, the best single unit in this matchup is Duke's defense, and it is staring at an opponent that prefers fast, high-scoring rhythms and does not always bring the same resistance on the other end. That combination, a dominant defense, a balanced favorite, and a home team that leans heavily on offense while being thinner up front than the roster page suggests, tilts the probability toward one side handling its job against the number rather than letting a late scramble flip things. As our first pick for this matchup, the Duke Blue Devils to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Books are signaling that this should be a game where points are very much on the table, the kind of matchup you would expect casual fans to enjoy with plenty of offense and a lively scoreboard. The raw averages certainly nudge you that way at first glance, with Duke living in the low 80s on offense while holding opponents in the low 60s, and NC State living in the mid-80s themselves while giving up something closer to the mid-70s. If you only looked at those numbers in a vacuum, you might shrug, think okay, fireworks, and move on. Here is the thing, the way those points appear actually matters more than the averages themselves. Duke owns a defense that sits near the very top of the country by efficiency, and that unit has a habit of turning comfortable offenses into frustrated ones. Michigan, with a top seed level attack, found itself stuck in the low 60s against this group. Clemson and Pitt were dragged into the low and mid-50s, the kind of outputs that feel even lower when every possession already feels like a small exam. Those are not random cold nights. They are part of a clear pattern where Duke squeezes shot quality and slowly pulls the pace down when games tighten. North Carolina State brings a top 40 offense to the table, but the defense lags well behind, sitting closer to the edge of the top 150 by efficiency. That gap is why so many Wolfpack games feel wild rather than structured, with runs going both ways and scores jumping quickly when the offense is humming. Even so, this specific version of NCAA State is coming off emotionally heavy games, including an overtime heartbreaker against Notre Dame where they gave up 96 and the legs looked tired by the end. Late in the season, that kind of effort can linger a bit, especially when facing a defense that makes you work for every clean look. The rhythm of this matchup points to something a little different from the raw averages. A high-powered offense running into a truly elite defense often ends up producing tense, grinding stretches, and those stretches chip away at total scoring more than people expect. This year, under John Shire, Duke has repeatedly shown that once they feel control of a game, they are comfortable slowing the tempo a bit, leaning into that defense, and making each trip more deliberate rather than turning every night into a track meet. So while the season-long numbers whisper points, the combination of an elite defense, a slightly worn opponent, and a likely shift toward more controlled half-court possessions suggests a total that lands lower than the surface-level math might hint. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Stephen F. Austin versus Incarnate Word. Stephen F. Austin heads into San Antonio like a group that already knows who it is, regular season crown in hand, with a record sitting around 26-4 overall and 19-2 in Southland play, while Incarnate Word is stuck closer to 12-18 and trying to squeeze through a very crowded door just to keep its season going. Honestly, that gap in stability shows right away. One side is treating this like a business trip with a checklist, the other is treating it like a last stand. The market reflects that feel. Stephen F. Austin is graded clearly as the road favorite, and that sort of respect usually does not show up unless a team has been cashing tickets and bullying the middle and bottom of the conference for a while. Let me explain. Stephen F. Austin has been stacking wins, taking 14 of its last 15, and doing it with comfort, carrying a double-digit average scoring margin built on an offense that can get into the high 70s and a defense that sits around the mid-60s allowed. They already handled this same Incarnate Word team in Nacogdoches, holding that offense to a forgettable night and walking away with a solid cushion on the scoreboard, the kind of game that looks even more impressive when you remember how tricky conference familiarity can make things. They travel well too, with strong results away from home and a recent stretch on the road where they have been covering regularly, while Incarnate Word has been doing the opposite, burning spread backers both overall and in its own building, which is about as subtle as a warning light on the dashboard for anyone thinking the home side is automatic value. Stylistically, it is not a friendly puzzle for the home team. Stephen F. Austin protects the ball, staying under 10 turnovers per game, which is top-tier stuff, crashes the offensive glass with real intent, and shoots well enough from deep that you cannot just clog the lane and hope they miss. Incarnate Word does have that pretty shooting profile from 3, sitting near the top of the league from outside and grading out near the top nationally, but the overall scoring margin is barely positive because the defense leaks quality looks and allows a high field goal percentage. So you end up with a matchup where the more physical, deeper group is also the one that tends to win both the turnover battle and the rebounding battle, and that leaves the underdog trying to survive almost an entire game while living on jump shots and hot streaks. That kind of story is fun if you are rooting for chaos and wild swings, but it is a stressful way to live if you are relying on it to keep a spread within reach, because 1 or 2 classic Stephen F. Austin runs can flip a tight number into a no-sweat cover in a hurry. As our first pick for this matchup, the Stephen F. Austin Lumberjacks to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. On the surface, both offenses have enough punch to scare you. Stephen F. Austin can push toward the high 70s. Incarnate Word can land in the mid-70s when the shots are falling, and the home team absolutely loves the 3 ball. That kind of profile usually screams points, yet when these two see each other, the actual rhythm has leaned much more toward a slugfest than a track meet. The first meeting between them was a perfect reminder, with Stephen F. Austin essentially putting Incarnate Word's half-court offense in a jar for almost the full 40 minutes and keeping the game controlled from a scoring perspective. That is not an accident. Stephen F. Austin's defensive identity is built on length, pressure on the ball, and relentless work on the glass, which cuts down second chances and takes away a lot of those easy transition points that can blow a total wide open. When a defense constantly ends possessions with one shot and done, it quietly drags games toward lower scoring territory, even when the offenses are not actually bad. Incarnate Word's season arc quietly fits that pattern too. Despite that excellent percentage from deep and a solid edge on the boards, they are only barely outscoring opponents on average, and a bunch of their recent contests have finished under the number, including several in a row that never really threatened to turn into shootouts. Historically, between these two, the script has repeated itself, with most of the recent matchups sliding under as well, which is the kind of thing you notice if you have been tracking Southland totals for a few years or even just scrolling through box scores on a Sunday afternoon. Here is the thing. We have also seen how rough it looks when Incarnate Word's shooting cools off even slightly. That game against Northwestern State, where they could not even reach 50 points on the road, is a perfect example of how streaky their offense still is when it runs into a structured, physical defense. Tie that to the usual late-season vibe, coaches tightening rotations, possessions getting more deliberate, players knowing every set and counter by heart, and you often get games that feel slower, even if the official pace numbers do not collapse. So while there is always the chance that Incarnate Word gets absolutely scorching from three and drags this into a wild, high-scoring script that breaks every projection, the more reasonable path points toward a controlled, methodical contest where the defense and rebounding set the tone and the final combined score lands below what casual fans might expect when they just glance at the offensive reputations. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Montana versus Northern Colorado. This regular season closer in Greeley feels like one of those classic conference traps, the kind that looks simple on paper and then refuses to behave once the ball goes up. Northern Colorado carries the shine at home, with the cleaner record and the kind of recent form that makes casual bettors lean their way without thinking twice. Montana walks in as the so-called underdog that plenty of people are ready to write off, which is usually where this program gets strangely comfortable. Previous history between these two already gave us a hint of how thin the margin really is. Montana handled its business in the first meeting with a solid win, not through some fluky shooting night, but through steady offense and a calm approach against defensive pressure. That kind of result quietly tells you they are not intimidated by the matchup or the jerseys, which matters more in March than any shiny number on a standings graphic. The way Montana plays on offense fits the profile of a team that hangs around in tight spreads. Shots come from good spacing, they share the ball instead of hunting contested looks, and they tend to cash in at the free throw line when whistles tighten up late. That combination, patient half-court sets plus reliable foul shooting, is exactly what keeps an underdog inside the number when the home crowd starts roaring and the favorite starts pressing a little. Northern Colorado, on the other hand, loves the fun part of basketball, scoring in bunches, pushing tempo, and letting the crowd ride every mini run. The flip side is that the defense often gives plenty back. Allowing opponents to live comfortably in the 70s and beyond is not rare for them, and that style turns games into long, back and forth exchanges instead of quick blowouts. For a road team with a stable offense, that is almost like being invited to stay at the party. Pressure in this spot leans toward the home side too. There is the expectation to perform, to put on a show, to close the regular season in style, and that emotional weight can creep into shot selection and late-game decision-making. Montana comes in with more freedom, trying to play spoiler, which often leads to looser shoulders and cleaner possessions late. Against the spread, both teams have shown who they are over the course of the season. Montana has been nearly even in its results and has held its own when catching points, while Northern Colorado has not always rewarded faith at home despite piling up wins. That mix of market perception and actual outcomes suggests the gap between these two, at least on the scoreboard, is smaller than many will assume at first glance. In a game that shapes up as competitive, emotional, and likely decided by execution in the final few minutes rather than raw talent alone, the underdog side carries real appeal for anyone who has ever watched a late backdoor cover swing a bet from heartbreak to celebration. As our first pick for this matchup, the Montana Grizzlies to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Northern Colorado loves to get out, run, and turn games into track meets, and the offensive numbers reflect that mindset with strong shooting from the field and a general refusal to slow down unless forced. Montana may have a calmer personality, but this offense is efficient, confident, and more than happy to trade baskets when the game opens up. The first time these two met, the scoreboard lit up with a combined total well into the mid-hundreds, and that came in regulation. Nothing about that earlier meeting felt like an accident. Both teams found comfortable looks, both reached the line, and both showed they can score in multiple ways, whether through early offense, half-court execution, or second-chance chances around the rim. Recent results for each side keep pointing in the same direction. Montana games have featured plenty of nights where both teams land in that sweet spot where neither defense truly solves the other and the final totals drift past typical conference ranges. Northern Colorado has seen its fair share of shootouts as well, especially against opponents that are not scared to run with them and have enough structure to avoid empty trips. The pattern is familiar to anyone who follows conference hoops in March. You get a fast team at home, a capable road offense, and two coaching staffs that know this is not the time to get overly conservative. Trend sheets from sportsbooks and data sites will show fairly healthy records toward higher totals for Northern Colorado and a balanced split for Montana. The interesting part is not just the win-loss record for those totals, but how the games look. There are runs, quick swings, and stretches where 3 or 4 possessions in a row end with points. When both teams play that way, even a short cold spell rarely derails the overall scoring rhythm for long. Stylistically, this matchup checks several boxes that point to an active scoreboard. Northern Colorado encourages pace, takes early shots, and forces opponents into transition more often than they might prefer. Montana counters with smart shot selection and strong free throw shooting, which quietly adds up when whistles start blowing more often late in the season. Fouls, intentional or not, become extra possessions and easy points, especially in the second half when both sides refuse to back off. The likely story here features long stretches where the offenses feel one step ahead of the defenses. Crowd energy in a late-season home game tends to push tempo higher, not lower, and both rosters have enough scoring options to punish even small breakdowns. If this game follows the familiar script of quick runs, trading 3s for 2s, and late fouling once the clock becomes the enemy, then the total has every chance to soar rather than stumble. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Iowa State versus Arizona. This one has everything loaded into it. Senior night, a fired-up whiteout crowd, and a Big 12 banner dangling within reach for Arizona. The Wildcats come in with that heavy favorite energy for a reason. They score in waves, share the ball, and do it with a rotation that feels like it never runs out of options. Instead of one volume score that a defense can lock onto, Arizona throws lineups at you where 5 guys can all create, finish, and punish a single mistake, which makes scouting them feel like trying to patch a roof in a storm. Iowa State brings a very different personality. The Cyclones love to hound ball handlers, jump passing lanes, and flip games with live ball turnovers. That disruptive style is their calling card, and it travels. The problem for them in this particular matchup is that Arizona does not play like a loose, freestyle offense that hands out free possessions. They move the ball with purpose, they keep spacing tight, and they generally value each trip. When a pressure defense runs into a team that is comfortable staying poised, you start to see those little cracks, the gambles that turn into easy buckets the other way, and that is where Arizona can quietly stretch a small lead into something more uncomfortable. The glass may be the real separating factor here. Arizona owns a major edge on the boards, and that kind of gap is not just a nice stat line. It is extra layups, extra threes, and fewer chances for Iowa State to turn misses into fast breaks. Every time the Wildcats clean a defensive rebound, they are also cutting off the Cyclones from their favorite chaos plays in transition, and every offensive board they grab is one more moment where the defense has to stay locked in for an extra 5 or 10 seconds. Over the course of 40 minutes, that wear and tear builds, especially in a loud building where one big putback can feel like a gut punch for the visitors. Recent form lines up with the same story. Arizona has already shown they can brush aside heavyweights, that blowout of Kansas with a huge free throw edge. And complete control of the tempo is a pretty strong hint at the ceiling this team is playing with right now. Add in that this is their last regular season home game, that they are honoring key seniors, and that the crowd knows exactly what is at stake in the league race, and you get a setting where the home side has every reason to keep their foot on the gas, rather than easing off if they get in front. It might sound dramatic, but spots like this often tilt not just toward a win, but toward a margin that reflects all those little advantages stacked together. As our first pick for this matchup, the Arizona Wildcats to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Scoring, on the other hand, has a real chance to take center stage from the opening tip. Both of these teams know how to put the ball in the basket. Arizona with that high octane, share the ball system, and Iowa State with an offense that is a lot more potent than people sometimes give it credit for because the defense gets so much of the spotlight. The Wildcats lean into efficient looks, they run, they space, and they get to the rim and the line, while the Cyclones have the shooting and playmaking to answer rather than simply trying to drag the game into a rock fight. Here is the thing, Iowa State's identity on defense does not automatically mean a low score. When a team is constantly reaching in, trapping, and gambling, the game can either bog down or, more often with this kind of talent on the floor, break open into a string of quick strikes and transition chances. Turnovers do not just end possessions, they often start fast ones, and both of these groups have athletes who can turn a loose ball or a bad pass into 2 or 3 points in a matter of seconds. So while the Cyclones pride themselves on holding opponents to modest totals, the way they go about it can actually feed a faster rhythm once both sides settle into the chaos. Arizona's recent performance against Kansas is a nice little preview of how scoring can snowball here. They piled up points without needing a fluky shooting night, leaning on smart offense, rim pressure, and a heavy dose of free throws, which is the kind of scoring base that tends to show up again rather than vanish. Iowa State, for their part, has enough perimeter firepower to stretch any defense, even one as tough as Arizona's on the three-point line. And when you mix accurate long-range shooting with a team that wants to answer quickly, you get runs flying back and forth. It might sound like a game where the strong defenses keep everything muted, and that is the contradiction that makes this matchup fun. Both sides have the tools to force stops, but they also have the guards, wings, and bigs to turn those stops into instant offense, and neither coaching staff is exactly allergic to pushing the pace when the opportunity shows up. If the score stays tight late, the usual late-game script comes into play: more fouls, more free throws, more possessions squeezed into those final minutes. That closing pattern is not guaranteed, of course, but with this level of talent and these stakes, it is easy to see a finish that tacks extra points onto an already healthy total. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Weber State versus Portland State. Portland State is getting a big nod from the odds makers, with an 18-10 type overall record, a strong league mark, and a home court that has treated them like regulars at their favorite bar. They are cast as the sturdy favorite because everyone knows them as the defensive enforcer of the conference, the team that keeps opponents in the low scoring range and makes every decent shot feel earned. That sounds great on a graphic, but the recent story has been a lot messier than the reputation suggests. Portland State has stumbled through a stretch where it has dropped 4 of its last 5, both in actual results and against the spread, while Weber State has quietly put together a 6-4 run over its last 10 and looks much more comfortable when games loosen up and get a little chaotic. Honestly, it feels like one team is still being priced off what it did weeks ago, and the other is being brushed aside because its style looks a little wild on paper. Weber lives in that 80s scoring neighborhood so often that it feels like their resting state, with an offense that pushes the pace, moves the ball, and leans into the idea that it can simply outscore people rather than win every half-court possession. The trade-off is obvious. They give up plenty on the other end and sit in that high 70s allowed range, but for anyone taking points, that kind of profile is friendly because it means they are almost never fully out of a game. Portland State sits in a different lane, more mid-70s on the scoreboard, more half-court, more about structure and toughness, and that style can impress coaches while quietly driving bettors crazy when the favorite stalls on offense while trying to protect a lead. The last time these two met on this same floor, it took overtime for Portland State to sneak away with a 5-point win, and that only came after the extra period, which says plenty about how comfortable Weber can be in this building. That night also showed that when Weber drags an opponent into a faster rhythm, Portland State's tough defense does not simply snap the lid shut. It has to live with some uncomfortable trips back in transition and more open space than it likes. Tempo numbers match that feel, with both teams playing a little quicker than the national middle, just enough to keep runs and swings alive, which naturally leans toward the side grabbing the points instead of the side trying to keep control. On the personnel side, the chatter has focused on Portland State leaning on key scorers such as Jalen Henderson and Terry Miller Jr., while Weber State relies on players like Tyjon Sane Jr. and Malek Gama to keep the offense humming. The one wrinkle comes from Weber guard Jace Whiting, who sits in that awkward space where he is on the roster but tagged with a foot issue, so treating him as unavailable is the safest read. Yet even with that cloud, it still feels like Weber has enough shot making and pace to stay right in the mix. Put all of that together, the recent slide from the home side, the more upbeat form from the visitors, and the fact that Weber has already proved it can hang within a handful in this matchup, and you get the kind of underdog profile that feels very live. As our first pick for this matchup, the Weber State Wildcats to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Now the fun part is looking at how many points this thing can produce, because that earlier meeting that finished 95-90 after overtime still hangs over this matchup like a giant blinking sign. Even if you mentally peel away the usual extra bump you get from an additional period, you still end up with two teams that have already shown they can push a combined score into a very high range without needing anything crazy to happen. It did not feel like some random one-off. It felt like the natural outcome of Weber dragging the game into its preferred speed and Portland State being forced to trade punches possession after possession. Season-long numbers tell a similar story for Weber, with their typical night featuring plenty of points scored and plenty allowed, so the average total in their games tends to live up in that higher-scoring neighborhood. Portland State offers a more balanced setup, often landing in the mid-70s on offense while still hanging its hat on defense. But even that group does not routinely drag things into the low 60s unless the opponent is willing to crawl up the floor and settle. When Weber steps on the floor, that kind of slow-motion handshake is rare, and that alone nudges expectations upward because both teams end up seeing more shots, more trips to the line, and more chances for a quick three or a straight line drive to flip the feel of the game. If you zoom in on recent form rather than the whole season, the gap stays clear, with Portland State's latest games hovering around the high 130s in combined scoring, while Weber's recent outings keep landing closer to the 160s. That means any projected number sitting somewhere between those tendencies is trying to balance on a pretty thin wire, and the natural swings of a college game, a couple of hot stretches, or a whistle-happy crew can shove things off that middle point in a hurry. There is still some ammo for people who like lower scoring stories, because Portland State has stacked several games where the totals have leaned under, especially on this floor, and history between these teams here has produced its share of games that finished lighter than expected. But those angles rely more on old versions of these teams, and this current matchup looks a lot more like a clash between a defense-first favorite that has started to spring a few leaks and a visitor that insists on turning most nights into something that feels like a track meet. That mix, where one side keeps pushing the pace and the other is forced to respond whether it enjoys that tempo or not, very often leads to finishes where the scoreboard runs hotter than the number suggested. Totals are still just predictions wrapped in math, not promises. But when you blend the earlier head-to-head, the season scoring profiles, the tempo, and the recent trends, the case for a high-scoring game becomes very hard to shrug off. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.